Sharing my. Okay, this session will be recorded again. Tell me if you all can hear this. It's further recording. You can share your screen now, and whenever you're ready, you can start.
Great. All right.
Can you all hear that? Okay. Perfect. Okay. And again, feel free to put your name in the chat and what you'd like to get out of today's session.
Hello, my name is Om. I am speaking today about some principles and practices for structuring a virtual tutoring program. Just as by way of introduction, I've previously graduated from the University of Pennsylvania, where I worked on a lot of tutoring initiatives and learned a lot about what success looks like for a virtual tutoring program, and excited today to share some of those practices with.
I received a chat message that the audio was cut off, so let me try and resolve this.
And one often asks is,
Can you all
how do
hear
I
this?
recruit tutors? How do I make sure I have enough tutors? Because as I think I'll preview later in the slides, the more tutors you have, the more effective your tutoring program can be, because you have
Can you all hear this? Okay, so from what I'm hearing is I'm gonna keep my microphone on. I think that the sound might be cutting out because I'm muting myself.
And then I would also think about parents.
I'll rewind about a minute here.
A lot of people's inboxes and phones with this opportunity. Often you'd pair this with a flyer or a short description. So this is like the way to get the most amount of traction for the tutoring program. But aside from that, I think important to think about other pockets of individuals that would be interested in your tutoring program. So for example, if it's a math tutoring program, are there other math clubs or math departments, math classes that are happening where you could tap into a network of people that will already be inclined to join? I think the same about community service groups. So if there are people who are already doing community service, talking to them about this program, they're more likely to join and be interested, right? So you're tapping into groups and pockets of people that already have an interest in your tutoring program and be more inclined to join. So the first strategy is more broad-based. The second is more targeted recruitment. I would also think about which personal and professional connections you have, like reaching out to your friends, any networks or groups that you're a part of, sharing it broadly and widely. I think there's no harm in just continuing to get the word out there, and more visibility, the better in terms of recruiting. The fourth here is on educational fairs and um, school fairs. So I'm thinking like club fairs or promotional activity fairs where lots of clubs and organizations have a chance to market themselves. That's a great opportunity to promote and meet people and talk in person about this. And then I would also think about parents both for for students, like parents often want to guide their students do certain types of activities, and getting this involved in their newsletters and listservs can be really helpful ways to draw attention and eventually get to the students who will be doing your tutoring in the program. So these combined strategies are a mix of both targeted and widespread recruitment efforts. You really want to cast a broad net and also be very specific about which groups of people are most likely to join. As mentioned on the screen here, with like people who are already involved in community service or people who share similar academic interests, etc. So these are some strategies and tools for marketing and developing and getting a lot of tutors to join your virtual tutoring program. We'll move on now to tutor orientation and how do you train and equip your tutors with the best practices and skills so that they're ready to hit the ground running and they're able to serve students in the best way possible. I think this is an often underlooked part of tutoring programs is the orientation and the training. And if you train your tutors very well, they can be very effective. And when they're very effective, your program is more effective. So you want to really be disciplined and structured in the way you train students. Put some key buckets of topics you'd want to cover in this training on the slide. First is on context, both of the community and the school where you're doing the tutoring. So we want the tutors to come in with an understanding of the place and the atmosphere and the potential headwinds or tailwinds that the school or community is facing. A lot of the times you have tutors that haven't necessarily lived in the area where their student is going to school, or they don't know much about the community. So it's important to provide a lot of historical context here. Have there been social and racial and economic injustices that have contributed to underfunding of the school system? What contributes to educational inequities within these schools? What is the educational background of a lot of these students? Are they performing at grade level or are they performing below grade level? And if they're performing below grade level, what are some of the primary drivers of that? So to give an example and for context, I did a lot of work in the community of West Philadelphia, which is a historically underserved, underfunded school system. And a lot of the tutors we were working with, they hadn't lived in Philadelphia or they were new to the area. So it was important to give them that context to understand that they were working in a very in a school with a lot of resource constraints and students who weren't necessarily performing at grade level because their schools didn't have the resources to support them in the same way that other more affluent schools do. This gives the tutors a lot more understanding and context when they go into the school and work with the students. They they understand that the students might not be at grade level or performing where they performing above expectations for their grade, but they understand the reason why, and they're less likely to try and push blame on students or um, treat students in ways that are divorced or misaligned from the context they're living in. So this is a really underappreciated and really important metric part of tutor orientation that you really want to emphasize just from the get-go. Then I would say focus on some best practices for tutoring. So you want to equip your tutors with some good skills going in. And I've listed 4 strategies here that I think are really important to emphasize. One is question-based tutoring. So this is an approach where you are continuously asking questions to your student. And oftentimes we see teaching as a lecture-based activity where you're kind of just talking at the student, but they're not really learning and absorbing in the same way if they're forced to think and respond to questions over and over again. So if you say your student's having a challenge with a fractions problem, part of guiding them to the answer isn't telling them how to do it, but it's asking them targeted questions so that they're able to come to that understanding on their own. Because the whole idea behind tutoring is that you want to help the student gain the competencies to be able to perform the tasks on their own. And if you're explaining it and doing it for them, they're not going to be able to kind of like fly on their own and do the question on their own. So when you add questions, you're adding scaffolding to the and supporting them so that they're able to eventually finish the question on their own. So I'll give you a simple example here. If we're doing 5 plus 7 equals 12, right? And the student has put the answer as 10. I might start with, so what made you write 10, or what prompted you to think the answer was 10? Then they might respond and say, well, I saw 5 and then I knew if I add 7, I could say 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I get to 10. And then I might respond with another question and say, okay, good. Let's start at 5. And it seems like you were counting up from 5. How many do we need to count up from 5? And then they would say 7. And then we would count up together 7. And then through that process, they would realize that 5 plus 7 is 12, not 10. So this question-based approach helped them scaffold the problem and gets the answer themselves, as opposed to me just going on a lecture about how 5 plus 7 is 12, and they might not understand that on their own and be able to fly on their own next time. So question-based tutoring is really important. Strategy 2, taking an individualized approach to tutoring. So when designing a tutoring program, you want to make sure that the content that each student's working on is tailored to their current skills and background. So if the whole class is working on multiplication, but one of the students isn't very strong with their addition skills, it doesn't make sense to start them on multiplication immediately. Instead, it makes more sense to go back to addition and refine some of those skills before moving on to multiplication with them. Because math builds on itself, right? And without a strong foundation of addition, they can't really do multiplication. So I would really recommend, to the best of your ability, understanding the academic profile of each student and understanding which content is really most suitable for them. It's this good intersection of where the class is and what their grade level content is with what their current skills are. So you don't want to bring them back in that example and just only do addition with them and never get to multiplication. It would be more so starting with addition as steps to getting towards multiplication, right? So everybody will be working towards grade level content if grade level is multiplication, but some students may need to start with a little more addition review to get to the multiplication. The third strategy is the student is embracing the student tutee relationship. So a lot of times tutoring can feel very transactional, where you're kind of just conveying information, supporting a student, telling them about some content or something. But we don't want to neglect the whole relationship aspect of it. That there's a great opportunity when you're working with a student to learn more about them as a person, to share your interests, to just become kind of more of a mentor-mentee friendship rather than just a tutoring relationship. And I've seen in the past that when tutors are able to really connect with their students, it really facilitates the academic growth of the student because they feel comfortable, they enjoy spending time with the tutor, they are willing to ask questions, engage more, So this can look several ways. One, it can be the tutor spending 5 minutes at the beginning just chatting with the student. It can be sharing their interests, right? It can be very intentional, remembering, oh, they're a basketball fan, and then talking about the basketball game that happened over the weekend, that kind of thing. So being very intentional about building in time to develop the student-tutor relationship, because in the end, that really supports the academic growth of the student and helps the program feel better for both the students and the tutors. Strategy 4 is very similar to strategy 1. It's while you're embracing the question-based approach, you don't want to spend a lot of time just talking at the student. You want it to always feel like a conversation where they're being pushed and challenged to ask questions, to answer questions, and eventually get closer to the answer. And then I'll add in one more strategy here that I think is important, and it's to not be afraid of the student messing up or failing. So part of the question-based approach is asking the student questions and letting them give you the wrong answer. Because when a student gets the wrong answer and then gets it right, that neurological pathway is very powerful and helps them learn. So oftentimes, if you're doing a question, like we go back to the 5 plus 7, and I ask them another follow-up question, like what's 3 plus 3? And they get it wrong. As a tutor, there's a little bit of attachment to them getting the right answer. Like you want them to always get the right answer. But in reality, you have to be okay with asking questions and letting them mess up. Because when they do mess up and then they correct themselves, they're really learning and growing. And you're taking those baby steps to help them like ride the bike on their own or fly on their own, right? And you have to remember throughout the whole process of tutoring that the whole goal is that they can do these problems without you, that they're able to fly and go on their own. And part of that is letting them answer a lot of questions, letting them make mistakes. The really good analogy is when you're riding a bike, you're taking off the training wheel essentially for the student. And when they do that, they're going to wobble and might fall. And it's your job to catch them. But eventually you have to keep letting them ride on their own such that they find their balance. And eventually will be able to ride on their own. And that's your job as a tutor. Finally, the tutor orientation is very important just to go over some quick logistics. What does the tutoring program look like? What are the expectations of the students, time and place, that kind of thing, for when the tutoring program happens. So now we'll go on to our third agenda item here and talk through what tutoring sessions look like and what are best practices for tutoring sessions. So the research shows that high dosage or high impact tutoring happens multiple times a week. And it's not always practical, but to the extent possible, you want to be working with students 2 to 3 times a week. And working with the same students and the same tutors working with the same tutors working with the same students. Because when you have the repetition and you have the same student-tutor pairings, you're not only developing the academic relationship, you're developing academic skills, but you're also developing the student-tutor relationship. And with the repetition and with the consistency, that's where you really grow. And what I've seen in the past is when we're able to work with students multiple times a week for multiple weeks, it can be really powerful in terms of helping them grow because they're just continuously in that mode of continuing to practice and develop multiple times a week. Third bullet here is a format of what a session could look like, you know? You start with a warm-up, which is like a puzzle, often just to get their brain going, or a fundamental skill like addition or subtraction or multiplication practice, and then going into the core content for the day, right? Which is often tied to the fundamental skills. So if you're working on multiplication, maybe the fundamental skill today is addition. It's the building block. Okay? You go into core content and you close out with some key takeaways. And the core content is often a series of problems where the students primarily doing it by themselves, right? And you're guiding and asking questions and supporting them to help them understand. But it's not you lecturing. It's more so problem based and very active for the student. The student's doing a lot of work themselves. Paper and pencil, I think, is the best way to go about this. In the virtual world, it is a little harder, but for them to have a paper copy and work through a paper copy, I think can be really powerful just because there are fewer distractions. I would recommend here, you don't really need tutoring sessions to be that long. 20 to 25 to 45 minutes of short, focused tutoring, you can really get a lot done and make a lot of progress. And then, like I mentioned before, you want the tutoring content that every student's working on to be as individualized as possible, right? So if everybody's working on grade level content, and the topic is fractions, for example, there are some students that might have a little more work on some of the building blocks of fractions, right? And others may have a little more advanced work on fractions. So they're all within the range of what everybody should be working on, but plus or minus, depending on where the students are and what they're working on. But I think about a tutoring session as being a high impact, short period of time, focused short period of time where students are really grappling with concepts on their own and figuring out how to best complete the content. Yeah. And then finally, we'll close out by talking a little bit about program evaluation and what do we think about as success. So it's very important to be able to measure your success with the tutoring program. And I think about success from both the lens of the student and the tutor. So for the student, that looks like it can look many ways, right? And you have to really define what your KPIs are. So what are the indicators that you're going to look at to see whether the program is succeeding? Are you going to look at test scores, teacher feedback from the students, right? So how are you going to measure whether the students are growing academically? And there's no right or wrong way, but it's important to be clear about how you're doing that. Then think about the tutor KPIs, right? So what indicators are you going to look at to see if the tutors are having a good experience, right? How are you going to measure their learning and development or their enjoyment of the program? And so it's important at the top here to think about how you're measuring success. What are your KPIs? And then below, I've listed some key tools which I've used in the past to measure the success of a tutoring program. First, from the tutors, I've often used a tutor feedback form where the tutors are documenting academic progress, learnings, evaluating the experience, right? So you're getting a sense of how the tutors felt their session went, whether the student was able to learn or grow. And this informs both how you coach the tutors and also how you develop academic content for upcoming sessions for the students. So if I'm working with Sam, who's a tutor, for example, and Sam says, today's session went pretty well, but the student could use a little more help with the building blocks of fractions. He didn't really understand fractions, right? Then the next time we come back with a session that's a little more targeted and takes a couple steps back so the student can understand the building blocks of fractions, right? So I've used the response to the feedback form to inform how I adjust the academic content for the upcoming sessions. The tutor feedback form also gives you a sense of whether the tutors are learning, they're growing, they're enjoying the program, right? And you have full control over the questions on the feedback form, and it gives you a sense of you can really control what the tutors are telling you. Then then I would recommend the student feedback form. So this is where the students themselves evaluate their experience. Are they learning? Are they growing? Do they feel like they're improving? Are they enjoying it? Right. So getting a sense from both the tutors and the students on through these feedback forms can help you measure your success using your KPIs. And of course, there are test scores or achievement scores you can also look at. But I find these feedback forms a really personalized, helpful way to really specifically measure the impact of your tutoring sessions. Because the test scores, for example, if you see a student test score increasing, you don't know whether that's really the effect of your tutoring program. But from the feedback form, you can document really clear causality of how the sessions went and how both the tutors and the students are doing. So I'll leave it there. Those are some key principles for tutoring programs, and happy to take questions as well.
Okay, thank you for the presentation, Noam. We will now begin the Q&A portion of this conversation. So the first question, at the beginning of your presentation, you mentioned a good way to recruit tutors potentially for a program is through personal connections or networking events, or even finding groups that might be interested in such topics. Where might you find such people through personal connections, for example?
Yeah. So I would think about from the lens of personal connections. I would think about which friend groups. It could be even as simple as the friends you're a part of, or folks you know through your family. It could be like people you know through school, teachers, clubs, community groups, religious groups. There's really no shortage of no wrong answer for the people that you reach out to. It's really based on who's in your circle and who you know, and that's a phenomenal way, I think, to get the word out.
Okay. You also mentioned orienting your tutors, and this is a very important aspect of virtual tutoring. How long do you think that an orientation should take?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it can be an hour, hour and a half at the beginning. But I think one thing I didn't hit on that's really important is it's important to continue to have professional development for the tutors throughout the course of the program. So these can be 15, 20, 30-minute check-ins every other week, maybe, to get a sense of whether the tutors are learning, growing, right, helping them continue to develop their skills. Because we can't think of it as like us training the tutors for an hour at the beginning and it being all done and they're ready to go. It's a constant process of learning and development, and that comes through frequent professional development sessions where we talk about challenges they're having when working with the students. How can they improve? And that's a really important part of the process.
How much you determine the frequency of each session depending on varying circumstances that others might run into based off of their own targeted audience?
Yeah, when you say frequency of session, are you saying frequency of the tutoring sessions or frequency of
tutoring sessions?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's hard to have a session more than 2 to 3 times a week, more than once a week, just because of availability and such. But if possible, I think the more is better. And if making a requirement for the tutors to be available twice a week will be monumentally important for your tutoring program, because they can have more than twice the impact with 2 sessions a week. There's a big difference between seeing someone on Monday and seeing them the next Monday and seeing them Monday, Wednesday, and then again on Monday, right? So you're really decreasing the time you're spending with the students in between the sessions. So I would say that there are a few strategies that come to mind. One, kind of making it a requirement for tutors to be available twice a week. Two, kind of coordinating with parents to make sure students can be available twice a week. And three, making sure the sessions are short, half an hour, 45 minutes, because it's much easier to fit in 2 half-an-hour sessions a week if they're shorter, as opposed to just doing 1 hour long session. And the 2 half-an-hour sessions can be more effective than the 1 hour. So those are some strategies that come to mind for me.
Okay. You also mentioned feedback in your presentation. In
Yeah.
your personal experience, what have you found to be the best feedback mechanism?
Yeah, I think the forums I mentioned can be really powerful because you're able to read through as a coordinator to learn more about how the program's going, what's happening in the individual interactions between students and tutors. When I was running a lot of the programs, I would observe, but a lot of I wasn't able to actually see what was happening in every interaction. And when I were to read through the forums of the tutors documenting their experience, I got a really good sense of, are the students learning? Are the tutors growing? Are they having a good experience? And those questions can really be answered by a pretty thorough feedback form that the tutors answer at the end of every session. And it takes them 5 minutes or less to fill out, but gives you a really good sense of how the session went.
Okay. Do you have any tips on keeping students engaged on a virtual format if, say, a student is losing focus 30, 35 minutes into a session?
It's a great question. I think taking breaks can be helpful. So a few things come to mind. One, taking breaks where possible. Quick 5-10 minute break, stand up, stretch, that kind of thing. Two, starting with a fun game can be helpful. Three, incorporating other games or fun activities within the content, right? So maybe it's they're trying to get to a certain target for a number of questions completed for the day, that kind of thing. Setting like we're going to work for 10 more minutes, then we're going to have a break, that kind of thing. And then four, keeping the session short. The session doesn't have to be longer than half an hour. It's more about the quality of the session rather than how long it is.
You also talked about ratios of tutors to tutees. What have you found to be the best number of tutors and tutees at one time? And it's something I didn't mention, but the 1-to-1 ratio is the gold standard. So if you can recruit enough tutors to be 1-to-1, that's awesome. And then anything, of course, it's not ideal, but having 2 students for 1 tutor can also work. 3 students can also work. But to the extent possible, you want to be 1-to-1. And what I've found is that if you have a smaller number of tutors and you have more students, it's actually better to have smaller periods of time that are one-on-one. So say you do 10 minutes one-on-one as opposed to 20 minutes two-on-one. Because the one-on-one, there's nothing like it. The student's so engaged with the tutor. With the two-on-one, the time just becomes less effective. The students can get distracted. Not as easy to convey the content. So you want to recruit as many tutors as possible for you to do one-on-one for as long as possible. Do your worksheets that you use for math directly, do they compare to what your students are doing at school? Yeah, you want them to be very related to what the students are doing at school. You don't want to be teaching something that's kind of different or is confusing to them. You want to be working closely with their school and their teacher to figure out what skills are most important for them to learn and develop at that time. So we would be in very close communication with the school, learning about what content was happening in the classroom. And then we would dovetail the academic content in the after school program with exactly what was happening in the classroom. So it would be a clear extension. Do you also see tutors sometimes getting burnt out? And how do you help maintain continuity in your program? That's a good question. Especially on the tutor side. Yeah, I think it is possible. I mean, creating fun social opportunities for the tutors to get to know each other, that can be fun. Because when the tutors are really connected to each other and they feel such a social connection to the program, to the other tutors, that can be really helpful. So that's one strategy I think that can be really powerful and helpful. How important is goal setting in these programs? I would say it's good to have the goal of like making academic progress and supporting the students and helping the tutors learn. But I would say setting goals like, oh, we want this student to be at this level or this score, they can actually sometimes be harmful because they tie so much to like an academic score and less to the process of learning, which sometimes takes longer than you expect. So I would say the goals we set should be that the student grows and gets closer to grade level content,
that the tutors are learning and developing and enjoying the program. And those broader goals are better to work towards than like a specific goal of Joey should get to 95% on their test, because that's harder to control, puts a little more added pressure. It doesn't create as healthy of an environment.
Okay, and do you also send homework to your students through platforms like Khan Academy, for example?
Yeah, typically no. We just want the session to be as high quality as possible, and then we don't want the student to feel overwhelmed with homework they have to do for school and the tutoring program. So we want it to just be very high impact and then good for the day.
Okay, got it. Well, thank you for your time, Om. Any closing remarks before we end this recording?
Yeah, I think this is exciting to talk about these principles, and I think overall it's very important to be very strategic and structured in the way you think through and design a tutoring program, because those decisions you make can have really powerful effects on the students. And then one last closing thought is, I'd say be just as attuned to the tutors as students, right? So you want to make sure the tutors are doing a good job and learning and growing and have good skills, because that contributes to the success of the program just as much as paying attention to the worksheets and the content and the students themselves. So you want to be focused on both the tutors and the students throughout the program. Oftentimes it's easy to neglect the tutors and focus more on the students, what the students need to improve, what worksheets we need to develop, and conveying that to the tutors. But you also want to help the tutors develop and become better tutors, because that'll raise the success of your program.
Okay, well, thank you again.
Thanks.
Okay, well, that was our conversation. Hopefully that cleared up some questions. Om is just a great individual. He's an associate at the the Boston Consulting Group, and recently graduated from the University of Pennsylvania. He's deeply passionate on this topic, and he actually founded and led MathMates, which is a tutoring program down in Philadelphia. So super knowledgeable on this topic, and again, super passionate. Um, but that was our conversation. I see a couple of questions in the chat. Um, I can answer them, and then we can jump into the last part of our session today. So, Mr. Felly asked, what strategies can help motivate local youth or community members to become tutors, even if they are not professional teachers? So, I think that this is a great question for a lot of different reasons. One such reason is that while it is good to have qualified tutors, it's not mandatory. As long as you have someone who is knowledgeable enough on a subject, that's good enough for one's needs if you're limited potentially regarding the qualification of tutors who might specifically need to help teach your students in a certain subject. So the main strategy that I would use to help motivate local youth or community members would be to really focus on talking about the impact of tutoring. I feel like something that's overlooked a lot of the time when talking about tutoring is the impact. I think, Mr. Felly, if you pitch the impact of a potential tutoring program or tutoring in general to your community members who you might need to tutor, I think that just talking about the impact can really motivate people to make a difference. But on your topic, Mr. Felly, I also mentioned at the very beginning of this session today that we were going to have you present a case study in your own experience. So feel free to unmute and talk about your case, your situation, and for the last 15-20 minutes, we'll have a conversation about it. Hopefully, all of you on this meeting could pitch in if you have something to add, and we can talk through it. So, Mr. Felly, feel free to speak If you can't right now, feel free to write a little bit about your situation in the chat. Um,
Yeah, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. My name is Ngoy Mbeshfeli. Am I audible?
yes.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Ngoy Mbeshfeli. I'm a refugee from Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC, currently living in Zaleka refugee camp. I'm here representing Zaleka Home-Based Care, a community-based organization based here in Zaleka in the country of Malawi. Yeah, Zaleka Home-Based Care was established since 2016 to bring hope and compassion to some of the vulnerable people in our community, especially people living with HIV and AIDS and other chronic diseases through psychosocial, mental health, palliative, clinical and nursing care. We also provide education and social support to children orphaned by AIDS and those children living with HIV and AIDS, either refugees and host communities. As I said before in the previous sessions, this is an amazing session you have implemented, and we are gaining more information that we are also applying right now in our work. In Zaleka refugee camp, we support children orphaned by AIDS and those living with HIV and AIDS, where access to quality education and the living support is very limited. As you know, in the refugee settings, education is not a priority, and nothing about education you can see in the refugee settings. Now, at Zaleka Home-Based Care, our work, which is to empower children and the youth between the age of 6 and 17, through education and the extracurriculum program, we believe that every child deserves access to learning and opportunities for personal growth, no matter their circumstances. Is why today I really accepted to go and knock everywhere where people they have way to support Zaleka Home-Based Care to bring also young people on the same map like others. We teach basic education, digital literacy, health and HIV awareness, life skills, and creative arts. However, our children face challenges such as lack of stable internet, limited device, and every few learning materials. We would like, therefore, appreciate this time you have given us and ask any support that could help us offer virtual learning and pre-recorded lessons or educational materials that our children can be accessing offline here in Zaleka refugee camp. With your partnership, we can continue to give hope and education to children who have lost parents to HIV and AIDS and those living with HIV and AIDS, ensuring they do and can learn, dream, and build a brighter future in their life. Thank you very much to give me this time and share with you what we do at Zaleka Home-Based Care.
Thank you, Mr. Felly. It sounds like you do fantastic work in Malawi. I'm deeply inspired by your work. So, to sum up what you said, it sounds like you support students with varying diseases such as AIDS and HIV. You mentioned you want to provide educational stability to your students, and you mentioned that you lack internet sometimes, the proper hardware and technology to help educate your students, and other different variables such as that. So before I give my thoughts, does anyone here have any ideas on potentially ways in which we can support Mr. Felly? Okay, feel free to write your ideas in the chat at any time. But Mr. Felly, if it's okay with you, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions about your situation, and from there we can all gain more context on what challenges you're facing. So I just had a question about potential distractions. So is there an area at your facility in which students can learn and there's limited distractions, or really is there a quiet space or a quiet room in your facility at all for tutoring?
Yes, we have an office. Zalikam Care has an office where we have behind our small room where we can equip, or we do equip 20, 25 children when we have a session with them. There is a construction where we have to meet every time.
Well, I would highly recommend potentially having tutoring sessions there. We've talked about this over the past four modules. Limited distractions is a key to effective tutoring. If there's distractions, your students will have a hard time focusing on what the tutor has to say. So I think that's at least a very good place to have your students be tutored, depending on scheduling issues. I'm not too aware about that on your side, but I would highly recommend that office space to be used for tutoring. Secondly, frequency. How often can you provide tutoring for your students if it's available?
Yes, this should be in the morning or afternoon here in Malawi. Like as you see, this time it's night, and we can't have children, those who can connect, because we just use our laptop, and then they'll be like watching or using one laptop from the office. They don't have phones, they don't have a laptop where they are, but they rely on our laptop or our phones that we have in the office.
Okay,
So the
understood.
frequency should be the morning, like based on the time of here, Malawi, morning or afternoon from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. That time, all children they can be available, and then we can do the work together.
Okay, that's great to hear. And D. Kessler, it might be David, it might be Dan. I'm just going to call you Mr. Kessler for the time being. But oh, Dan, it says in the chat. Dan mentioned that pre-recording sessions is a great idea, and I agree with him. I think that one potential solution to your internet problem could be pre-recorded sessions. So if you have, you mentioned, youth community members in your community, if anyone would be willing to potentially record a 25, 30-minute lecture on a specific subject, whether that be math, English, or science, anything really that is in need. I think that, along with Dan, of course, um, pre-recorded sessions are a fantastic idea. While Ohm did talk about how a one-to-one ratio is key, if you're limited on resources, a pre-recorded session is great. Um, After potentially showing the recording to your students can branch off and maybe work on what was specifically talked about in each session. So that could be a potential solution to the internet problem, pre-recorded sessions. But on the topic of subjects, is there a specific subject that your students are lacking in, whether that be, um, I guess it wouldn't be necessarily English in Malawi. Um, would it be language, math, history? Is there a specific subject that you're trying to focus on?
Yes, there is two specific courses that I can share with you right now. As we have started this, it was in 2019 about mathematics and English as the second language. Now, this year 2025 is where we were willing to do the introduction to the computer so that they should be able to use internet to write, and is why we are willing now to have, if we can have fund to have more computers, or even we can have some phones that we can be using with them, they should be also like adapting to use the devices. Yeah, those are the specific courses that I can say. Here we are not saying that we have already started the introduction to the computer, but we have already started about mathematics and English as the second language.
Okay. And I have one last question for you before we start to wrap up. I'd love to hear your thoughts on potentially having students from another country record a session and send it to you. How do you think that your students would react to that idea?
Please, can you come again with the question?
My question was, do you think it would be a good idea for students who might not potentially be from Malawi to send pre-recorded videos to you to help tutor? Since virtual tutoring, we've talked about this, it's very good because it provides accessibility. You don't necessarily have to be tutored by someone in your own state or country, even. It could be someone from another country. Would you be open to potentially having students from a different country send pre-recorded videos to your camp so that your students can learn from such videos?
Without any problem, we are ready. We are open for connection. We are open for anybody who can support in this area.
Okay, that's fantastic. Well, thank you for the conversation. I thought this was very enlightening, and we'll definitely stay in touch. But we can start to wrap up now. Thank you all for joining the session. We're done. We've successfully completed this program. I just wanted to thank you all for supporting the program, starting from the first session, even if you haven't been here since the first module. It's been fantastic. It's been an experience, and hopefully, we've impacted many of you, and hopefully, many of you will take these topics and information to your own local communities and attack this epidemic, the epidemic of a lack of knowledge in younger students all around the world. But again, thank you all for joining. I know that Miss Corona isn't here, but I just wanted to thank her. She's been instrumental in helping create this program. Mr. Fraser as well, they both work for Project Echo. They're amazing people. And again, thank you all for joining. I am going to send the link of the form in the chat, a form regarding how the session went. I would highly recommend you all to fill out this form because it provides me with feedback, and I'm definitely looking forward to creating a new program focused on this topic. It would help me pivot and attack some of the obstacles that we needed to focus on this time. But again, thank you all. We're going to wrap up a little early today, 4 minutes early. The support's been tremendous, and hopefully, you learned a ton today and also throughout the past 4 weeks. Thank you.